Okay, so next step now is to go through and actually add all of our objects so that we are ready to start to interact with them, get them in the game itself, import them, and then add a little bit more code to our level, and then we're almost ready to go. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, is start to look at building those objects. So we're going to close all of the folders that we don't need. We are going to be using this objects folder. Actually, for now, what I might do is close all of those files down because we don't need them. Now, you might remember from the last video, or even just from the rooms one where we added the platform room, the quickest way to be able to add an object to the objects folder is going to be to select the objects folder here in your project, right click on the objects folder, go down to new, and then select Python file. Now we have a couple of different objects to make, so we're going to make them all one after the other, and then we're going to go from there. Now remember, because we have selected Python file from our right click menu, we don't have to add .py there. We can just put in block, which is going to be the title of this one, and then we're going to add the following code. So we're just going to say from GameFrame import, and then we're going to have room object. Okay, and then basically from there we're going to create our class. So we're just going to have class block, and it's going to be a room object, and then we're going to have our init. So remember, 2 underscores in the init function, and then we need to add some extra properties that are going to come across. So we're going to have self, we're going to have room, we're going to have x, we're going to have y, and it's just y, not uy, and we are going to have image. Okay, so for our block, and then we are going to have our room object dot init, and that's going to be self room xy, and then self dot set image, and that's going to be image 3232. Okay, now this piece of code is actually going to be a little bit different to the other ones. So we would also normally need to load our image in. But what we're going to do instead with our block, because it's going to determine what the image is going to be from the maze that we created, we're going to pass that image through here as part of the parameter. Okay, so that's why we're going to pass in image up here, and then we're going to call image there, and that's where it's going to get that information from. Okay, so that's our block done. We're going to right click on objects again, select new, and then Python file. We're going to be doing this quite a few times. This one is going to be called block door. Okay, it's going to be just a little bit different. Okay, so we're going to have a tiny bit of extra code. Oops, I didn't press enter. So new Python file block door. Okay, and our block door, for the most part, the code is the same, but with a couple of different changes. So from GameFrame, import room object, and then we're going to have a class of block door. Okay, this is so we can call it later. Make that room object, or get the room object functionality. Define init. Okay, and then the things that we need are the same here. So we're going to have self room x y and then image. So again, the image is getting passed through basically from the maze code. So we're going to have our room object with its init, and it's going to have self room x and y, and then we're going to still have like the same thing we did last time. So self.set underscore image, and the image is going to be image, so that grabs that last property, and it's going to be 32 by 32. But the difference with this one is that we are going to set some depth on it. Okay, and the reason we're going to set the depth is so that the player can run through the door, which gives them somewhere to hide. Okay, so if the monsters are coming, the monsters will still hit them. I hit the door, and then they'll bounce back. So we're just going to have, whoops, that needs to be the right indentation. So self.depth, and that's going to equal 20. Okay, so that's what we're looking for there for our block door. All right, so we're finished with our block door. We're going to move on to our next piece of code. So when we jump into objects, so remember, right click on there, new Python file. Okay, I'm going to say that every time so that you remember. And this one's going to be our goal. So same code as always, from GameFrame, import room object, and then our class is going to be goal, and it's going to be a room object just like last time. Okay, you can see that some of this code is very much the same, and then we're going to have define the init function, which is going to have the properties of room x, y, except this time we're not going to bring image in. So image this time is going to equal self.loadImage, okay, and it's going to load goal.png. And then we're going to have that line of code that we had before, self.set_image, and it's going to be image 32 by 32. Okay, so this one's sort of the same, so we're still setting those same, wait, I missed one. I missed a line of code, okay, and we can see that because these are grayed out, and that is the room object and init function, so that's that one there, so self room, oops, x and y. Okay, now that they are all white, we know that they're all getting used, which means that our goal is ready to go. All right, so as I said, these are a little bit different because we are calling the image directly inside of the init function of the goal class. Okay, and that's where things are a little bit different. So what we want to do instead here is we are going to continue to make some of the rest of our code, okay, for our two monsters and our player. All right, we then will still have one more object to go, which is going to be a little bit different. Now, our monsters and our players do have some extra code that's going to be added. So normally I'd try and fast forward this so that you can see it really, really quickly. But remember, right click, new, Python file. This one's going to be called monster. Okay, so from GameFrame, you should get the hang of this by now. Import room object. Class is going to be monster, and it's going to be a room object. And then we're going to have our define init function, oops, okay, with the properties of self, room, x, and y. And then we would have our room object init function. And it would have self, room, x, and y, so that all those properties are picked up. Okay, so our image this time is going to be self.load_image, and this time you might have guessed that because it's the monster class, it's going to be monster.png. And then we're going to set our image. Okay, oh sorry, that's right, self.setImage, and it's going to call image 32 by 32. So remember, what we're doing is we're picking up this variable from up here, okay, and that means that we don't have to type that code in each time. So it's going to make things much quicker. Now, our monsters do move around the screen, so we need to be mindful of that, and we need to set some parameters for them. So specifically for our monster, we're going to have y_speed equals, and then it's going to equal -6. Okay, so on the y-axis, this one's going to be moving around. And then we're going to have self.register collision. Okay, so this is basically setting us up so that we know when we hit something, and we're looking specifically for the block. Now from there, we need to say what happens when we have the collision. So we're going to say define handle_collision, and you can see that it's already bringing across some other properties for us. That's why I pressed enter really quickly. So we're going to have a self, an other, and an other type. Okay, and from here, what we're going to say is if other_type equals block, we're going to self.y_speed multiply equals -1. Okay, so this also needs a colon at the end. That's why this, so you can see that squiggly line there is showing as an error. That's because our if statement needs a colon at the end. Okay, so where we are at with our game so far in terms of our monster is ready to handle collisions. Okay, so if it hits a block, it's going to send a message to GameFrame saying it's registered the collision. And then once it registers the collision, it will run this function here, which is our handle collision one, and it's going to find if it hits a block. Okay, now only if it hits a block is it going to run this piece of code here where it says self.yspeed multiply equals -1. And what that is used for is to reverse our direction. So obviously in maths, if we have a positive number and we multiply it by a negative number, we get a negative number. Okay, so it switches. If we have a negative number and we multiply it by a negative number, we get a positive number, okay, which again means it switches. So by setting the code up this way, where we multiply by -1, it's going to keep that number the same, but it will always change from 6 or -6 to 6, and then back to -6, and then to 6, and then it will keep going, so on and so forth. Now the cool thing about this is we are going to set up a different monster because this one only moves in the Y direction, or on the Y axis, so it goes up and down. So what we're going to do instead is we are now going to copy all of this code. Okay, so we can cheat a little bit here. We're going to right click on objects, new, and then Python file. This one's going to be called monster2. Okay, so that gives us this fresh file ready to go. And then what we can do is paste this in. Now you'll see that we're still going to keep most of the stuff the same. So from GameFrame, import room object, class, monster, except this time remember it's monster2. So I'm going to call that monster2. Okay, we are still going to load the same picture. Okay, because we want our monsters to look the same, but the changes that we need to have here is that we no longer want it moving on the x-axis, y-axis, we want it moving on the x-axis, and same down here. Okay, so they are the only two pieces of code that really need to change when we copy and paste from our monster to our monster2. So we're going to change the name of the class, and we're going to change the movement from the y-axis to the x-axis. Okay, so that means we now have one monster that moves from left to right and right to left, so it goes across the screen. And then we have another monster here that goes from top to bottom or bottom to top, depending on where it's moving, so it goes on the vertical axis. Okay, so that is our code for our monsters done, and that's where I'm going to leave this video here, because we are going to spend an entire video working on our player, because there's actually quite a lot that goes into our player itself. So you have now built your block door, your goal, your monster, and your monster2. Now again, we still can't test it because we don't yet have a player built in there, and our game is expecting to find a player, so we would get an error. So I'll leave this one here, and I will see you over in the next video.